Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 302 of the Counselling Tutor podcast. Our guest today is Irene Hajinaru, who is a Leeds-based psychotherapist. She has a clinical diploma in integrative psychodynamic counselling from the Metanoia Institute, a certificate in counselling skills from the Metanoia Institute, diploma in gender and sexuality and relationship diversity, and I think that's from Pink Therapy, and she's also a published author. Today, Irene and myself will be discussing a recent lecture she delivered on pre-trial therapy and further considerations for counsellors. So with that said, let's get on with today's episode.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Lise Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to the Counselling Tutor podcast. You've joined Rory and myself, Ken, at episode 302, and we are delighted to welcome you. We're going to be covering three topics today, starting with ethical, sustainable practice, where we're dipping our toe into supervision and speaking about reducing shame within supervision. We then go on to Practice Matters, the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor podcast, where we bring you an expert. Rory's already introduced Irene, and she is going to be speaking about pre-trial therapy. We then go into Student Services, where we see you, the students, on your formal journey, and we're going to be speaking about how to manage next level overwhelm related to your studies. But starting us off, Rory, reducing shame in supervision. Interesting topic.
Yes. I attended a seminar, a workshop recently, and one of the speakers was talking about reducing shame in supervision. And it struck me that I just wonder how many therapists who use supervision, because it is an ethical imperative, don't bring all their client work to supervision because they're afraid that their supervisor will in some way shame them. And, you know, I've taught counselling, I taught supervision. In fact, Counselling Tutor runs a supervision course, and initially kind of myself taught it. And one of the things that I guess we wanted to get over in that was that when you're working with a supervisor, even if they're a student, they are a colleague in practice. And the onus is on us to bring to supervision not only ourselves, but also a kind of compassion to therapists, to be able to, for them to be able to present themselves and their work in supervision without the fear of harsh or incorrect criticism. And the lecture that I saw really drove that home. You know, there were lots of kind of anecdotal stories of therapists just not bringing clients because they were afraid of being shamed by their supervisor.
Yeah, getting it wrong and being scolded or told what you have done wrong and how you should be doing it. That's really, I think, a really important part of this topic. You know, we speak in counselling about power imbalance and how we're so often looking to kind of balance the relationship with the client and the counselor, so that the client can truly be their full self, so that they're not bringing topics and then kind of feeling that they may be judged on that. So it's kind of a threat-free environment. Now, when we go into and we're looking at supervision, there has to be a level of power imbalance in supervision. We go to a supervisor because we choose them because they're further down the road than we are. We choose them because they've had specialist training in how to supervise. And they kind of hold our practice in a way with us in service of our clients, and they might direct us on the ethical framework or how we might be working with a client. But whenever there is that power imbalance, we run the risk of doing what we think will gain the approval of the other party. And this can even be subconscious. You might be hiding a part of yourself or a part of a client presentation or something you thought when a client said something out of fear of being corrected on that or not gaining approval from your supervisor. And I think this is the key to this, is can you be your real true self within your supervision relationship? And I think of one time, Rory, where I was working with a client. It was early on in my counselling journey, I guess. I'd finished my placement and I was now in practice. And I became embarrassed about the fact that as the client was speaking, a little part of my brain just popped off and started thinking what I was having for lunch. And I thought, that is now something I can never go to my supervisor and say that the client was talking and I was being there with the client, but then I found myself moments later, I'd wandered off thinking about what I was having for lunch. And I guess I felt an element of, can I take something like that to supervision? Am I going to be viewed as a lesser practitioner by my supervisor? I want to impress my supervisor. I want my supervisor to think I'm doing a great job and that I'm getting it right. And I think therein lies the key, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely can. And I think that probably there's people listening, or the listener may say, well, I've done that, or thought about, how I'm going to make my drive home or my walk home. It does happen because we're human, and human beings
Yes.
tend to kind of roll like that. So let me ask, a few kind of clear questions about what your supervisor does. So, does your supervisor normalize mistakes and emphasize learning? In other words, do they provide like an encouraging environment where if you make a mistake, it's like, well, that's kind of a natural, in the natural order of things. What can we learn from that? Or do they normalize your experience by sharing their own experience of their own practice? And this is something I do with my supervisees. Certainly when I had student supervisees, they would come to me and they did make, what we call kind of rookie errors, if you like, if you want to frame it like that. And I used to say, I can remember doing that when I was, when I was younger in practice. And I can remember, feeling, quite like with you, Ken, with the lunch in episode that you kind of shared with us. And I would say, that's how I felt. I felt a little bit like this. Let's just see what we can learn from that. What is it? What could we learn? And maybe in the case of you, Ken, it might be that, well, you're just human. Maybe you're hungry. And, as long as the client wasn't affected, then, where's the harm? No harm, no foul. And that just reduces the stress that can be generated by somebody thinking they've done something wrong when all they've really done is been human. And I think also sharing that, every practitioner goes through similar struggles. I know, Ken, I've when I've been in front of clients, all sorts of things have popped up in my mind. That's how your mind works.
Yep.
That's how our minds work. And to normalize that, I think is just very, very useful. And also it sets the stage for if maybe the supervisee brings something that needs a little bit more consideration. In other words, it doesn't shut them down or discount them.
I think that was a great example of you actually actively normalizing and emphasizing learning there with what I brought, Rory. So you did not say, You thought what, Ken? When you were with a client, there was not a judgmental way about you there. You kind of normalized it by going, well, that's human. We all drift away from time to time. What is the learning that can happen from that? And I'm very glad to say that I did take this into supervision. So I found that courage, and I did go in. I had a great relationship with my first supervisor, and I did mention that my mind had drifted to lunch, and I caught myself. It was just seconds, and it was normalized. I was not judged, and what was my learning and takeaway from that was that I was actually in service of the client because I noticed it. It wasn't unconscious for me. I saw it and went, wow, look at that, and was able to learn and grow from that and recognize that human element of self. And you've spoken also, Rory, about the second point, which is on our super duper handout, which we'll direct you to in just a moment. And it's that non-judgmental atmosphere. We speak about a threat-free environment that we try to create for a client so they can bring their whole self. They can say whatever they say without fearing any kind of judgment. And I guess creating a non-judgmental atmosphere from the supervisor's point is really important in creating that threat-free environment for the supervisee. And ways of doing that is the supervisor being real and being human themselves. As a supervisor, you might say, oh, sorry, can you just say that again, please? As you were saying it, for some reason, my mind just drifted away. So showing your own mistakes and being open with them. And I go back to my very first day of counselling training, level 2 counselling training, walking into the class. I was really nervous. I wanted to get everything right, make a good impression with the group and with the tutor. And the tutor walked in and struggled to work the technology. It was whiteboard technology that had just been installed in the learning institution, and she was struggling a little bit to get that going. And she openly owned, oh, I'm really struggling with this. And I thought, if the tutor can make a mistake and own it and be okay with that, maybe I can too. And I think maybe that's part of that non-judgmental atmosphere, that congruence of being and not judging. Rory, what's your thoughts on creating that safe, open, non-judgmental supervision relationship?
Well, it's essential. It's essential, and it's essential for two reasons. And, everything we do is in service of the client. Everything, from our training to our CPD, to our reflection and reflexy, being reflexive, what we do from reflection, from our supervision is done for one reason and one reason only. And that is to be in service of the client, that person who comes to us, who needs our help and needs to work out what's going on for them. So it's really important that anything that's an obstacle to that is, I guess is moved around. And if there is an obstacle to it, it will impact on the client. One of the things that we teach in the supervision course that we run is a very old supervisor's I call it like a Wile E. Coyote trick. Wile E. Coyote was a sneaky cartoon coyote that used to chase the roadrunner in my youth, a little cartoon that used to be on when I was a child. And one of the things is that you say to your supervisor, so how many clients have you got? And they'll say, I've got 8 clients. You say, fine. And, let's have a review of those clients. So you do just a quick review where people are, and they say, well, I'm working with, I'm working with Suna, but she's okay. And then you say to them, okay, well, let's hear about Suna anyway, because what can sometimes happen is that supervisees may hide clients for fear of being, for fear of shame. And, when I told my supervisor that I was doing a supervision course, she did exactly the same thing to me. Let's talk about that person. I said, I know what you're doing, Sue. I know what you're doing. And she was laughing, and we had a good laugh about it. And, it's really important because hidden clients don't serve anyone.
Yeah.
They really don't. And if we can reduce supervision, if we could reduce that in supervision, all the better. And also, I think, encouraging reflective practice. Does your supervisor encourage you to, be reflective, analyze and reflect on your own actions, your own thoughts and emotions towards your work. Because that's a rich area in supervision. I've said it once and I'll say it again. Client can only go as far as you're willing to go yourself. And if there's anything that's holding you back, then that will hold the client back. It just is a case of that. And that's where a supervisor needs to be very, very thoughtful. This isn't managerial supervision. This isn't like when you go into your kind of boss and have your yearly review. It's not like that. It's completely different. Clinical supervision is a consultative process where you're trying to make sense of what's going on. And a good supervisor should reduce shame. And in fact, it wasn't actually the person who delivered the shame seminar. It was someone else who delivered a different seminar. But they said when they supervise using kind grandmother eyes.
Yes.
So I like that. Kind grandmother eyes. So in other words, you're bringing your wisdom, supervisors bringing their wisdom, and they're supporting the supervisee. So important. And as I said, Ken, it's something that we kind of build into the spirit of our supervision course. We train supervisors. And if you are interested in becoming a supervisor, if you go to counsellingtutor.com.
It's right there on the page. You can't miss it. Just scroll. It says big, massive block that says supervision training. Click on that. The training is in process at the moment. You can join the waiting list and get the handbook download so you can see what that training encompasses and how that works. And as you're saying this, Rory, I'm kind of thinking, the word shame itself. So shame is an emotion, and it is an emotion that causes us as human beings to hide stuff. I don't want anybody to see this. It is shameful. I'm going to keep it inside. And when we keep that inside, it becomes a toxic loop, because we'll think over that, and I could have done it this way, and I should have done it that way, and I shouldn't have said this, or I shouldn't have thought that, or this shouldn't have happened, and it should have done this. And it becomes this toxic loop that can go round, and it can really burn into us. And I guess the first step of reducing that shame in supervision comes from the supervisee, you, the counsellor, going to your supervisor and finding the courage to bring that part of self, to say, look, I'm going to be vulnerable here, and I'm going to take that shame, I'm going to hold it in my hands, and I'm going to reach it out, and I'm going to hold it up to you, and I'm going to show it, and I'm going to show the true me. I'm going to show what's really happening in me, because shame is an emotion that we're feeling inside. And you've covered so far, Rory, the supervisor's side of that, and what a good supervisor will do, and how they will receive that, and how they will work with that, and how the relationship will be built to welcome that shame within supervision. But it is a two-way street, isn't it? It's a two-way street that, as the practitioner, finding that courage is sometimes not that easy. And one of the ways of maybe thinking about how you might work with that is, if you are feeling that heavy, going round in circles feeling of shame, and how would I take this to supervision? Can I take this to supervision? Maybe write about it in your process notes, just in your process notes, in your own jottings, and think about it. Get it out a different way than it just going round in your mind, and maybe try and phrase a way, or a sentence, or a few sentences of how you might present that to your supervisor. And I think the thing to remember is that your supervisor is on your side. The supervisor is there for the same reason as you are, to service and be there for your client, and to hold your practice as you grow and you develop. This is a relationship that supports you, but it requires the courage to bring our true selves. And of course, the relationship needs to be the right relationship for you, where you feel that you can bring your whole self. And in supervision, I think from the position of the supervisee, being vulnerable is an incredible strength, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. There is a responsibility on the behalf of supervisees to do their bit, and to find the courage, I guess, to speak with the supervisor if things haven't gone right. One of the worst things is to say, well, I'm not going to discuss it. And then things just progressively get worse. And before you know it, it ends up with a complaint, or it ends up in front of the ethics board. Heading things off at the pass, as they used to say in westerns, in Western films, is the best thing, because what can start as a small difficulty can actually escalate into quite a large difficulty. And by going to your supervisor and saying, look, I've done this, I don't know what to do, a good supervisor will kind of take a view and say, well, this is what we can do to mitigate the difficulty, because people do make mistakes. Let's be clear about that. People, therapists do make mistakes. The other thing I would say is that supervisors should grow with their supervisees. So if you've been supervising someone as a student and now they're, qualified, experienced practitioner, it's up to the supervisor to grow along with them, and to actively acknowledge in supervision that the arc of the change. In other words, say to the supervisor, as I do, you're now a competent, qualified therapist, and to renegotiate the relationship that you're having with your supervisee, that, you're no longer kind of a student, you're actually a mature practitioner. And I think that the supervisory relationship changes within that. It becomes more of a consultative endeavor rather than when you're a student, it's more of an educative endeavor. So I think supervisees, they should grow together. And if they do that, there's a bigger chance that there won't be any shame. It'll reduce shame, and the supervisee will get the best service possible.
Well said there, Rory. If I could, I would clap hands loudly. And, as you're listening to this, if you're listening in real time, chance may be that you might be a student and you're graduating at the moment and about to get your certificate and be a qualified practitioner. If your supervisor doesn't raise the topic that Rory just mentioned of how does it change now, then you can go to your supervisor and say, I'm graduating, I'm getting my certificate in a couple of weeks. How might our supervision change going forward? Because it matures like everything. It matures and it grows and it has an arc. Well, there it is. That is reducing shame in supervision. There is a super duper handout that Rory has made for you. All you need to do is go to counsellingtutor.com. That is on my website. Click on the podcast tab. Just make your way to episode 302 and you can download that. There is no charge at all from the website page where the show notes are. And if you're listening to this and thinking, hey, you know what, I've graduated some years ago, I've got maturity in my practice now, and I might think about training to become a supervisor. Well, the training that Rory mentioned that is offered by Counselling Tutor is available. Just go to counsellingtutor.com. On that page, you will see the supervision training course and you can download that handbook and see if that is for you. So that is our ethical, sustainable practice for today. Moving away into Practice Matters, where we bring you the interviews with people that have specialist knowledges within our profession. And Rory, you met up with Irene speaking about a really important topic, and this is pre-trial therapy.
Yes, I met up with Irene Hajinaru, who is a very accomplished therapist. We've spoken to before on the podcast, and she was instrumental in helping draft pre-trial therapy guidelines for counsellors with the government. So obviously, if somebody is going to trial and they're going to therapy, there's always so much they can talk about in therapy. And she has, she with others has helped redraft those guidelines. Now there's been an update to those guidelines. There's further considerations that practitioners need to know about. It really is a not to be missed lecture. So I caught up with Irene, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
You may be listening to this at a time when you're working with a client who's going through a court case and you're very, very concerned about, the legal aspects of working with someone who is going through the legal system. My next guest has been with us on a number of podcasts, episode 232 and episode 242, and has made a wonderful lecture for us on pre-trial therapy. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me on again. My name is Irini Hajianu, and I'm an integrative psychotherapist based in Leeds.
Yes, thank you very much, Irini. And as I say, you've made a couple of lectures for the Counsellor CPD Library, but today you're here to speak about pre-trial therapy and maybe the changes and amendments that have happened recently, because the law seems to be quite fluid at the moment, and what people may have understood about what they can do and how they can work with someone pre-trial may very well have changed recently. So, Irini, you've made a lecture. So what is the state of pre-trial therapy? What do therapists need to know?
Yeah, you're right in that they have changed relatively recently. So they changed in May 2022. The guidelines themselves as a whole have been around for about 20 years in total, as of the time of our recording. So what we're referring to is the Crown Prosecution Service guidelines on pretrial therapy, and they are relevant to any practitioners working with a victim of a crime in England and Wales. There's been a number of significant changes to the guidelines, which, yes, as you pointed to, definitely means that therapists need to be thinking about, how do I change my practice? So that's what I'll be talking about in the presentation.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm sure there's a lot of anxiety around, you contract with the client and then they say, going through a court case, this is what I'm here for therapy for. I'm taking my perpetrator to court. What should therapists first think about? So if that's disclosed at maybe the first or the second session, what should go through the therapist's mind? What are good actions to take?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a good question. And actually, the first thing to note is that the pre-trial therapy guidelines apply to any victim of any crime. So whilst in practice, practitioners such as myself that work a lot with survivors of sexual and domestic violence are relatively likely to have notes requested if their client's going through the legal system. Actually, it applies to any victim of any crime that we might be supporting. So contracting is important, maybe thinking about how you take your therapy notes and why, and not because we need to radically change how we support clients who are pre-trial, but just to make sure that we're actually treating every client the same, because whilst the pre-trial therapy guidelines apply to a client we'd be supporting that has an active report, CPS assessment or trial going on at the time we're supporting them, actually the reality for a lot of therapists is that our notes can be requested at any time, including long after somebody's worked with us. Therapy notes being used as evidence in criminal proceedings is, as you say, anxiety inducing for therapists, but there's some very simple adjustments you can make to your work to make sure that actually you're just delivering services as you would do with any other client at any other time.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to understand that as a therapist, you're not on trial. You're just aiding colleagues in the police service or the Crown Prosecution Service, as it is in England and Wales, to be able to help the wheels of justice. And of course, you're supporting your clients. Now, you're talking about notes, and I think it's worth reminding ourselves that notes should be really factual. They shouldn't contain any opinions, should they? They should just really be factual.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And also clients should understand that contracting, that you are taking notes. That should be all up front. And I guess also that clients should understand that their notes are going to be maybe asked for by the Crown Prosecution Service. They may be requested.
Yeah, and clients feel really differently about that. Some of them are understandably very intimidated by the whole process because, of course, even for us as therapists, we know that having our notes shared with a third party is a way that our confidentiality is impinged upon, and that can be very anxiety-inducing for people involved. Equally, I've certainly worked with clients who take the experience of having their notes requested and the therapist guiding them through that as a really great opportunity for us to extend the type of support that we offer. It's another way that we can hold them, so to speak. So it doesn't have to be completely stressful, if I'm honest. But I totally understand why it can be, and I've certainly been there myself.
Yeah, so I think part of that is to normalise the fact that notes are requested. As to explain to the client, maybe in contracting, if it comes up, that this is standard procedure. This just happens, and work with any anxiety that the client may have around their notes being sequestered. Because it is personal information, isn't it? And
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I think as well that whilst we might feel a bit more relaxed about the fact that this happens relatively routinely, one thing that the presentation that I've delivered will support therapists to be aware of is actually how do we provide choice when there are opportunities for choice in how notes get requested. And you're right, it is a client's personal data. It's their data first. So how do we respect that, and how we manage, even just procedurally, any requests for notes from the police or CPS? Obviously, it's a slightly different situation if there's a court order from a judge where we don't necessarily have a choice, but actually how do we make sure that our work and any interactions that we have around notes being requested or court ordered, how do we keep the client at the centre of those communications? Because obviously they're the most important party in all of this. So for me, I like to be on this topic in a way that means that therapists aren't sort of being like displaced from the work that we normally do. And it's like we've said, it's easy to feel like we can't proceed as normal, and that's true to a degree. But actually, there's things that we can do as therapists to be empowered ourselves, so that we can empower our clients, so they don't get lost in the whole process. And ultimately, they're getting the support that they need, regardless of whether or not it's disclosed to the criminal justice system.
Yes, and also managing our own anxiety. If this is a first time event for a therapist, could be quite angst inducing. So I'm guessing that the best place to take that is to supervision. An experienced supervisor should know about this, hopefully, and be able to provide context and support.
Yeah, definitely. And, you're right, as with any other client that we might be supporting, regardless of whether they're pre-trial or not, if we find ourselves as therapists feeling stressed, whatever that looks like for us, taking it to supervision so you can receive any support you need there, so you can focus on your client and their needs. I have to say, kind of touching on this part of working pre-trial always reminds me of something that Babette Rothschild has said, which is when we're doing trauma work, at least one person needs to be in the room. Ideally, that's the therapist. So yeah, you're right. If we need support from our supervisor or in, the resources that counselling tutor are providing on this topic, that really, really helps us to stay grounded so we can do trauma work, even if somebody's moving through the criminal justice process.
Yes. I mean, I think that's such an important observation, because I've studied the work of Babette Rothschild, and indeed I've just written a trauma informed practice course. We did counselling tutor deliver a trauma informed practice course, and that is very much worth stressing, isn't it? That when someone comes to you and they're traumatized, and as you said earlier, that it might not be abuse, it could be any crime or any incident that's happened, that the therapist has to be the person in the room who's present. And I read somewhere that even if the client's less than 60% present in their body, you may be in a situation where you might have to manage disassociation or disconnection. So it's really important we have that understanding in ourselves. How present are we in our own bodies when we're working with someone with trauma? And I think that, working with clients who are going through the legal system can add an extra aspect of that to a practitioner.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, the presentation that I've delivered does touch on actually how do we gain consent from a trauma-informed perspective, i.e. how do we support our clients to have enough time to actually properly think through, say, a request that's come through for their therapy notes. How do we do that in sessions with them, knowing that actually, as you've quite rightly pointed to, they're not fully quote unquote present because they are living with, say, PTSD, how do we support them to make contact with us so they understand actually what's going on, can get in touch with actually what they do want to happen, what they don't want to happen, and all of those really, really important things. I think, yeah, you've made a really great point there.
And autonomy is a big part of this, isn't it? Because we need to make sure at all times that the client is working with autonomy. They shouldn't be fitting in with us. We should be trying to fit in with them.
Yes, exactly. And I would say that definitely goes for the major changes that the pretrial therapy guidelines have undergone in the last coming up to 2 years now, which is that there is more emphasis even within those guidelines from the CPS that a victim of a crime, or we might say survivor, i.e. our client, has a choice as to whether they have therapy or not, with who, for how long. I know obviously that's different in practice, particularly for those clients that can't afford private therapy and have to go on waiting lists and be told how many sessions they can have. But that emphasis on actually it is victim choices to accessing therapy or not, and what they talk about or not, and that kind of thing. So those are really significant changes for us as therapists to really get our heads around, so that we can really be there and like you say, facilitate a client's autonomy in all of this, kind of no matter what happens, even if there may be circumstances pre-trial they don't quite have a choice as to how much information is shared about them within the legal system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also thinking that there's a kind of added dynamic, isn't there, when you're working with clients who are going through a legal process. There's managing the trauma aspect of things, which is, a substantial piece of work for therapists to engage in, but also managing the other side of it, which is, of course, managing the concern about going to court, because that is can be for some people quite a stress-inducing event.
Yeah, definitely. And pretty much all the time, particularly when it's survivors of sexual and domestic abuse, or at least within clients that I supported, they often only really learn how the legal system works because they're going through it for the first time. So for us therapists, whilst we're not legal professionals, being well informed as to say how the criminal justice system is structured, or what are the pretrial therapy guidelines about, just means that we can offer that holding and containing in a very particular way, just because if we kind of think about it in trauma terms, it's really easy to be re-triggered within the criminal justice process because, unfortunately, at least within England and Wales, it's an adversarial system. Victims get cross-examined in the same way that a defendant is. And also, if you're going through a system where you're just having to deal with whatever comes, then you end up having to be very reactive. And that's really familiar, unfortunately, to people who've experienced traumatic incidences. So again, back to us being grounded as therapists, if we're well informed enough around the CPS guidelines or what the criminal justice system is like, then actually it just means we can just be a bit more still and move at a slower pace than our clients, so we can support them to move into hopefully avoiding being re-triggered as much as possible, just by virtue of moving through the system.
Yes, yeah, and I think what I'm hearing here is that maybe some form of education about, or some information sharing, at the very least, about how this works, because they may not have got the whole picture through who they're connected with. Maybe it's police liaison, or maybe it's their legal team. So just adding some context, the therapist adding context. And normalising it could be useful. Is that something that we should think about as therapists, do you think?
I think it's a I think, as we've acknowledged, it's a really fine line between being well informed and particularly in situations where if we're survivors, where actually completely reasonably we may be the only person that they trust. So, I mean, I can certainly speak from my experience because I'm really well informed in this area. I tend to use any information that I do know as a framework for me to be grounded, so that actually, say, for example, if a client says, my case got NFA'd, I know what that means, and they don't have to do the work to explain it to me. And the function of that, I think, is just to signal safety, holding, containing, rather than I'm going to have to go, through this over and over again and verbally explain to everybody that I meet. When a client is feeling quite uncontained and re-traumatized themselves. So it's all goes back to really us well informed. Just means that we can be grounded and supportive. Like I say, signal safety to our clients. They don't have to work hard to be safe with us if we're well informed, if that makes sense.
And I'm guessing the term NFA means no further action, which means that sometimes,
Correct,
sometimes the incident is investigated, and the police or more to the point, the Crime Prosecution Service, who bring prosecutions in England and Wales, I believe, they may decide that it's not met the bar, I think they call it, for going to court, and they may decide not to take any further action. And that can be, I've worked with clients who have gone through giving a statement, the trauma of having to talk about what happened, being interviewed on a tape in an interview room, and then all of a sudden, 3 or 4 months later, they get a letter through the post, or maybe they may get a phone call saying that, unfortunately, no further action. I mean, that, again, is another piece of work for a therapist, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. And I think in those instances, what I've found helpful to do, actually clean working with clients from minoritized communities, say LGBT people or people who are not white, essentially, knowing that actually the idea of justice isn't something that is easily accessible to all persons, and also actually what does justice mean to you in terms of moving forward with your life, and feeling that there is a degree of this being, whatever clinical term we might use, either ended or resolved or worked through or recovered from. I think just, I'm deliberately using kind of therapeutic language because ultimately that's the work we're here to do. And you're right, an NFA or however the legal system might go, could have devastating effects psychologically. So actually figuring out what the meaning of that is for any particular claim is incredibly helpful, and just again regrounds us back to really what are we here to do if somebody's moving through the legal system, or even if they're just thinking about reporting, because that can have a whole meaning to it that we could be invited in to navigate with our client.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you hope that people who watch your lecture will take away from it?
To be honest, I think just to be less frightened by the whole thing, because it's, as we've acknowledged, it's really get anxious about it. I think noticing and learning about actually what are the choices we can provide, because we try to be collaborative as much as we can with our clients, and figuring out actually how do we navigate this in a way where we're well informed enough that we can make choices and anticipate what might come up next, rather than just this is a thing that's happening to my client and therefore happening to me, happening to us, because that kind of latter description is very much what trauma is like anyway. It's a being done to rather than having choice, collaboration, control, consent. So that's my main aim, really.
Well, working with pretrial therapy guidelines is a lecture in our CPD library now. And Irene, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much to Irene. Thank you to you, Rory, for holding those all-important discussions. And of course, Irene has done a lecture on this. It's available in the Counselling Tutor CPD Library for Qualified Professionals. If you want to know more about that, just go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information right there on the homepage. We now move out of our practice matters and we head straight into student services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counselingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your counselling tutor discount. That's counselingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, we're going to be speaking about how to manage next level overwhelm. And I know this comes up, it's in real time. If you're listening in real time, it's kind of high assignment and exam and portfolio submissions time, Rory, and we've spoken about the anxiety that might raise up around that. But once that has passed over, then there's almost for many there is the what is the overwhelm of what comes next, the next level of my course or starting a course, and what I can do now in preparation for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a topic that's repeated in our Facebook group. And if you want to join our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. We'll let you in, and you too can contribute to all the interesting conversations that go on there. But yes, managing next level stress, definitely. It's a bit of a thing. And in my experience, what happens is that, someone may do a certificate in counselling, decide to do the diploma, and then what happens is that they're fully immersed in the work and the criteria and the assignments, all the things we've discussed on all the other podcasts, Ken. And then what happens is that they kind of burst out at the other end, and they've passed, and they've had an interview maybe for the next level, and the stress of actually doing the certificate kind of ebbs away, and it's just replaced by another whole load of stress about, what will the next course be, and how hard will it be, and what do I have to do, and also a confusion. And I think the thing is that as you move up the qualification suites from introduction to certificate, from certificate to diploma or degree, depending on where you're going, that anxiety kind of racks up. So, I mean, the first thing I would say is that, if you're in that position, if you're listening and you're thinking, no, that's me, that I'm really stressed out, the first thing I would say is just take a little, a couple of weeks break after you've finished, and just find some space for you, because these courses are all encompassing. I never thought I had a life for about 3 years when I did mine. I ate with textbooks on the table. I slept with textbooks, next to me. I went to the bathroom and there were textbooks stacked up on the bath. There was a bit of a theme going on. And eventually it was a bit of a shock when I came to the end of my studies. I don't know about you, Ken, but it was a bit of a shock. It was like, what am I going to do now? I really didn't know how to use my free time, because I was just so engulfed in study. So I'd say just take some time, just re-engage with the things you did before you were a full-time scholar. And then start to plan a little bit about finding out about what you're moving into, and think about some low-level strategies just to ease yourself into the next level before you walk into the classroom door, or walk through, not walk in, hopefully, walk through the classroom and walk into the classroom, Ken.
And of course, we do recognize that we're speaking about overwhelm. And as you kind of mentioned, Rory, maybe overwhelm around assignments. And then when that's over, it's overwhelm about the next part of the course. And when you finally graduate and you get you're now qualified counsellor, perhaps overwhelm of what's the next steps? Where do I go? Do I work in an agency? Do I go into private practice? So many questions. And this is not going to be the same for all. I mean, the overwhelm seems to... It's a characteristic that may come up more in some than others. Other people may feel excitement around those same things. So we're specifically focusing on, if there is overwhelm within you, what can you do? And the first thing, I guess, is that it is okay to experience overwhelm. You're not doing it wrong if you're feeling overwhelmed. So I just want to normalize that. So it's not something wrong with you if you go, I'm nervous about this. Why do I feel so overwhelmed? It's okay. It's okay. You can take a deep breath and know that you're not the only person to feel this way. And you certainly won't be the last person to feel this way. And I think if you look back across your life, you'll notice that it kind of will have shown its little head at numerous times during your life where there is change, because we are, as human beings, we're kind of a bit resistant to change. It's in our DNA. I did read about why that is, and it's very interesting. If we go back to our hunter-gatherer state, staying in one place and doing the same things, we had a better state of survival. So it's kind of wired into us that when there is a change ahead, it can be very overwhelming. And we can look at the unknown, or the fear of the unknown, with overwhelm. What do I do? How do I show up? What's that going to be like? And of course, there's so many sayings which are easy to say and less easy to integrate into self, of things like 99% of the things you worry about will never happen and things like that. But the truth is, when you're feeling that overwhelm, it's very real and it can be a blockage. And overwhelm usually shows itself before when there is some form of resistance. So you know what you're doing. You decided to go and study. You're getting to the end of the study. You know you're going on to the next level, but there's a resistance. It's going to be a different group. It might be a different tutor. It might be a different learning institution. Who are they going to be? Who am I going to be within that? And it can kick off a whole lot of thinking that just perpetuates that overwhelm. It can actually raise it. You can feel maybe that you get anxious, go from the overwhelm into showing signs of anxiety. Breathing is a great way to work with this, letting it go, going, yes, I see, you know what, I'll find out who they are when I arrive. I'm just going to let that go now, and I'm just going to be me, because underlying all of this is the truth that you are enough. You really are enough. And a great place to go back to when you feel this overwhelm, when you're facing that resistance and that unknown in front of you, go back to what you do know. And one thing you do know, if you're studying counselling or psychotherapy, you know why you're doing it. You know what led you into studying counselling and psychotherapy in the first place. It is your why. And you can always go back to your why when the seas get a little bit rough around you, when you don't know what to do. And the truth is, you know, when you graduate and you're a practicing therapist, we face resistance some more in different areas. So it comes back, it circles back all the time. Where do we go in overwhelm? We go back to our why, what I do know, why I'm doing this. And within your why, I think, is the answer. The answer is good enough. You don't need to know everything about the next course, who they're going to be, what's expected of you, what the books are that you need to read and download. It'll all be given to you when you arrive there within the time. Know you're enough. Know that you are good enough. And go back to your why.
Yeah, well said, Ken. I think I should applaud now. I'll do a bit of silent clapping.
A lot of clapping today.
Silent clapping. I wonder if people are clapping at home with that. Sure they must be. And if they're not, they should be. Give kind of a clap, unless you're driving, in which case keep your hands on the wheel. What I would say is that with overwhelm comes transference. And I don't think I mentioned transference for a few episodes, so now is a good time to slot it in and to remind ourselves what transference is. It is when we access feelings of the past. So you go in to a shop, the person behind the counter reminds you of your school bully, and you get those feelings that are transferred from the past. That poor person in the shop probably never saw you before, doesn't know who you are, probably a very nice person. But it's very easy for us to get caught up in that time machine of transference. And I think what can happen, and what I observed as a tutor, and to be honest, what I observed in myself, is that those childhood feelings of going back to school raise their head.
Yeah.
They really, really do. Because we're all stretched out kids. I've said this on the podcast before. We're all stretched out kids. And I think sometimes just to arrest that feeling, and there's a bit of a vitamin, why don't you just write down all your accomplishments? Get yourself a piece of paper, draw yourself a circle with a felt tip pen. Write down all your accomplishments. Doesn't matter what it is. You might have won a swimming badge. You might have won a cookery competition or anything you've accomplished. And then one little trick is when you've written them all down on your piece of paper within this circle, and certainly the qualifications you've got to progress to the next level of counselling, put that piece of paper on the ground, yeah, and then just stand into it and recite all those things you've done. And it's amazing. It's sometimes called the circle of excellence. It's a little trick that athletes use. They teach it in sports psychology, I believe. And what can happen is that you are then forced to recognize actually your greatness. You're in a position where you cannot escape the fact of your accomplishments. And that's mightily good. And I'll share a little secret. When I went to get my teaching job in Warrington, that's exactly what I did. And I had a piece of paper, I did in the car park, and I stood into it and felt my inner power rise, and I got the job, and the rest is history, really. But, just be, you are good enough. I think that's what I'm trying to say. If you've been given a place on a course, your tutor has seen something in you that says to them that this person's why is strong enough, and you'll go forward. So I hope that's useful. And you're not on your own. Everybody worries about the next level. Everybody does. And when I graduated from my diploma about 18 months later, I went on to be a teacher. I'm a glutton for punishment, I think. And I was in the same position. When I found myself in the same emotional struggles, and I had to engage it. I had to meet it where it was, really.
Yeah, I love those personal affirmations of self, reminding yourself of your strengths and who you are and what you have done and why you were there to do it. And one last thing I'd like to share on this: overwhelm, anxiety, nervousness. It's an emotion, it's a feeling, it's a physical feeling that you can point to a part in your body of where you feel that. We feel it in different places. It might be in your tummy. It might be a little bit higher. It might be in your chest. I feel mine in my tummy. And I was given some great guidance many years ago, which I now know is kind of behavioral therapy at its base. I didn't know it at the time. It was way before I entered the counselling profession. I was working as a professional entertainer at the time, and there were many times that I would have to go out on a stage in front of many hundreds of people, or in front of television cameras in front of many thousands of people, and I would get really nervous. And somebody once said to me, that nervousness and excitedness feel very similar. And you can replace one for the other by just saying to yourself, instead of, I'm really scared of this, I'm really overwhelmed about this, I'm really nervous about this, change the word, one word, to, I'm really excited about this. I can feel it. I can feel the excitement in my tummy. I can feel the excitement in my chest. It's another form of positive affirmation, giving a name to it that is not a negative name, but a positive name. And Rory, you mentioned our Facebook group earlier, and I noticed within the Facebook group, you see two different kind of roads to this. It's almost like the road splits, and the one is, I'm so frightened, I'm so scared, I'm so uncertain, I'm so overwhelmed. And the other road is, I'm so excited about, I can't wait to discover and find out what it's going to look like. And I guess if you are consuming content, consume the content of the road you want to be on. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you start reading content of other people that are overwhelmed, would that add to your overwhelm, or would it ease your overwhelm? And you need to make the decision of that, because there is a choice in it. It's a selective consumption of what you take in. There's a great story about a person who arrives at a town, and outside the town is the soothsayer, Rory. And the soothsayer will always tell the truth. And he stands outside the town gates, and he says to the people as they arrive to the town, "Why are you here?" And the first person arrives at the town, and the soothsayer says, "Why are you here?" And the first person says, "Because the last town I was in was terrible. Nobody spoke to me. It was a horrible place. I didn't get on with anybody, so I want a new town. How is this town, Mr. Soothsayer? And the soothsayer said, sadly, I got bad news for you. It's exactly the same as the last town you were in. 5 minutes later, another person approaches the gate. This is person B, approaches the soothsayer. The soothsayer says, why are you here? And the person says, because I was in another town and it was great and everybody loved me and I got on with everybody and I just want to explore this positivity and I'm hoping this time might be something like that too. And the soothsayer says, well, I've got some really good news for you. You found a town exactly the same. You're going to find the same here. And it just reminds me that no matter what we do or where we go, Rory, we take ourselves, and it is maybe not, as Anna Sanin says, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. Can you change the overwhelm into excitedness? Because it is an incredibly exciting time. It really is. You're going on to another level or a new course. Wow, good for you. You deserve it. You earned the right to be here. You go get 'em. That's my final words on that, Rory.
Yes, as Jean-Luc Picard, the captain of the Enterprise, and a fellow Earl Grey tea drinker said in one of the episodes, let's see what's out there. And that is the truth. You're going to see what is out there. You're going to be an explorer in your own learning. Never a more exciting time, Ken.
Go out there and make the difference that you were born to make. This is episode 302 of the Counselling Tutor podcast.
Yes, we started off with ethical and sustainable practice. We talked about reducing shame in supervision and asked some pertinent questions about how your supervisor may work with you. And of course, there is a super duper handout for that. We moved on then to practice matters. We had an interview. I spoke with Irini Hejinaru discussing a recent lecture for the CPD library, legal considerations for pretrial therapy, further considerations. A great lecture, and such an important lecture because it's so important that we understand the law and the law of disclosure when we're working with clients who may be going through a court case. So a really important piece of work, and I think one not to be missed. And then we moved to student services, how to manage next level overwhelm. And Ken and myself had a little bit of a sojourn along the route of positivity and the excitement of moving into the next level and not getting too tied up in negative emotions. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast and you think it might be a benefit to others, why don't you share it on other people's feeds? Share it on your Facebook, or maybe even leave us a positive review on the platform that you're listening to this on. It could be iTunes. We love a positive review. It makes the work we do so much more exciting when we see someone who said, oh, we've loved your podcast. It's always nice to have a positive review. And also, thank you so much for allowing us to be part of your journey, part of your lives, lending us your ears for the time that we broadcast the podcast. It does mean a lot to myself and Ken. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.